Thank you to all the colleagues who made these presentations on behalf of both sides of this debate. We'll first give an opportunity to the panelists in case they wish to ask any questions or they have any clarifications that they would want from the colleagues who have presented. Okay, so then we'd like the panelists to share their views on what has been placed before them. So should we begin with Justice Shah?
So good evening to everyone present here. Let me first explain why I have decided to come here. I think last couple of months were extremely disturbing and volatile. I was amazed to read the reports in media and the several voices which branded a entire university as anti-national. I mean, this is something which really disturbed me. I just started thinking. I mean, there is now new debate on the nationalism. So, I was told that if you don't chant a particular slogan, you would be considered anti-national. That would be taken as a disrespect to the Constitution. In my school days, we sang Vande Mataram, we sang Jana Gana Mana, and we said Hindustan Jindabad and many other slogans. I want to give you my own background on this. My grandfather was the president of All India Hindu Mahasabha. In my childhood, I was very closely associated with him. My paternal grandfather was staunch Gandhian. Anyway, what I want to tell you is this, that my grandfather never uttered a single derogatory remark against any Congress leader or anybody. In my childhood, many of us, at that time, I attended a RSS Shakha for a few months. I studied Savarkar for my graduation. I read the entire Savarkar. He's a great poet, but I cannot agree with his idea of Hindu Rashtra. I cannot agree with their idea of Hindutva. I cannot agree, and this is my right. This is my right to dissent. I have a right to think differently. We are forgetting that. And we are saying that you don't chant a particular slogan, then you are anti-national, or you have a particular view, then you are branded as anti-national. The nationalism is the debate on nationalism has been brought to such a low level by us. I just want to know, those who kill innocent people in communal violence, those who loot the country, those who are, engage in nefarious activities which are not permitted, which are prohibited by law. Now, would they be considered national because they chant a particular slogan or just like that? So I would be considered a nationalist if I shout, at the top of my I mean, I cheer Indian team when there is a match between India and Pakistan. When I go there with the national flag. No, that's not correct. Nationalism is far more serious than these ideas of which are now being circulated these days. I come to your institution for this. I love my country, and I'm sure that every one of us, every one of you present here, love the country as much as the Prime Minister of this country or any leader of the opposition. I equally love my country, and I am sure that all of them love the country as much all of us. I mean, so this is a matter of really different thinking, different ideas, which was really which is the essence of our constitution, which is about which Chief Justice Chandrachud of Allahabad High Court spoke so eloquently, that the right to dissent, that's our right. I mean, that's our heritage. I mean, that's our constitution. So for me, I mean, it's all Indian constitution is Gita, Quran, or Bible. Everything is in constitution. So therefore, I was disturbed that an institution which is one of the country's a prominent institution is regarded as anti-national by some vilification campaign, and I strongly object to this. Second reason I came here is what happened in Patiala House. That's the most shameful event which took place inside the court campus, where not only the accused but the media persons were beaten. And I am anguished by the reason that no action has been taken against them. Why the courts, either the High Court or the Supreme Court, has not initiated any action against this, against the lawyers who have really? Where is the rule of law in the country where if the just 1 meter away from the Supreme Court, such incident takes place in a court of law? So these are very serious issues which we must sincerely think. I mean, I cannot support by any chance that somebody is supporting any activity which is prejudicial to our country, or which is supporting some terrorism somewhere. I mean, but I have an issue. I have issues about I'm in favor of abolition of death penalty. Suppose if therefore I have a view that a particular person should not be executed. That's my view. I'm not saying anything against the country. So we must have that kind of a 19(1)(a) is the greatest gift the Constitution has given to all of us. So we should not allow this to be taken away from this on some ideas of nationalism. Coming then to this particular inquiry, I just wish to first clarify that it's impossible for this panel to say to express any view on the merit of the inquiry, whether there are inconsistencies, whether this is really not the view that any member of the panel can express on presentation from the teachers community. But there are some areas which I feel that that should be really troubling. I mean, before I proceed, I just want to read to you a very eloquent statement by the Supreme Court. Very recently, this judgment was delivered by the Supreme Court, and I want to read this to you. It is well settled that a person who is required to answer a charge imposed should know not only the accusation, but also the testimony by which the accusation is supported. The delinquent must be given fair chance to hear the evidence in support of the charge and to cross-examine witnesses to prove the charge. The delinquent must also be given a chance to rebut the evidence laid against him. A departure from this requirement violates the principles of natural justice. Furthermore, the materials brought on record pointing out the guilt are required to be proved, etc. So the very first requirement, I mean, it seems that the first time it is said that this principle of natural justice, it was Lord Byas's observation, I must read. Even God did not pass a sentence upon Adam before he was called upon to make his defense. Adam says, God, where art thou, as thou not eaten of the tree whereof commanded thee that thou should not eat. So even the God first said that I'm giving you an opportunity of to explain your conduct. So let us start with the first point, which is sort of a contentious issue. I have gone through your rules. There is an elaborate procedure provided under Statute 35 for conduct of the disciplinary proceedings either against the students, members of the staff, or any other employee. Now that's a very elaborate procedure. Now that procedure contemplates that it is ordinarily, ordinarily it should be the chief proctor and two additional proctors. They constitute a committee and they inquire into the matter. I cannot dispute that the Vice Chancellor has the right to constitute any committee of his choice. I mean, that's a power with the Vice Chancellor under your law. But when you constitute a committee which is different than a committee which is provided by the statute, it is incumbent on the authority to first explain the terms of reference and the processes for such committee. If you are going to constitute a new committee, special inquiry committee, the high-level inquiry committee which is now constituted, so it ought to have declared the terms of reference, the norms and procedures to be followed by the committee. That's very important, and that is very closely linked with the issue of principles of natural justice, because the students or any person against whom an inquiry is being conducted is entitled to know what are the charges against him. So what is the process to be followed by this committee? What are the norms? How the evidence is going to be recorded? How the whether the cross-examination would be permitted or not? These are the issues. So therefore, I felt that it ought to have been public domain, that the norms and procedures for such inquiry. Second, I can give you one example. Many years back, there was a case of ragging in ILS Pune, and then it was said that this proctorial committee may not give justice, and finally the dean decided to form a committee. But what was that committee? When you replace the existing procedure, then you must bring in some independent procedure. So what in that case was done by the dean was to invite a very respected retired judge to conduct an inquiry. If you feel that there are serious issues to be tried, then I feel that it should not replace one internal procedure by another internal procedure without making known what the new procedure is. So this could have been done by an independent authority, independent committee. It was possible, but I still respect the Vice Chancellor's power to constitute a committee according to his views. But I feel that it is lacking there somewhere. The second point is, I'm not sure whether the facts given to me are correct, or there might be some other version, because one version of the university administration was given before us, but that's again it's just I mean, as he rightly said, that it was an act. So it's not really their version which is being presented before me or my fellow panelists. But one thing I realized that if the students had written letters asking for the procedures and they had every right to cross-examine the witnesses. The evidence ought to have been recorded in their presence. They should have been told that this is a particular procedure is being followed, and they should have been called to participate in the inquiry on these terms. Then another important aspect is that when it is now in public knowledge that the video part of it was again, I will not use the word doctored, but it was fabricated. And then there is another committee that is magisterial inquiry, which said that these witnesses appear to be tutored. Is all the more reason that a proper opportunity has to be given. The another important aspect which is missing, and which I mean, you mentioned, Professor, about that only a fragment of the report is given to the students. That's not correct. Actually, the entire report ought to have been made available to them and given a fair opportunity to give their reply to the report from this high level committee. You see, I mean, there are difficult situations. I mean, they come many times, unprecedented situations. I mean, the charge was very serious. Anti-India slogans were shouted in the campus, etc. Maybe, but this is when there are difficult times, it's a duty of the authority to follow the process of law. See, what is said it may not be exactly apt for this occasion. So it's said that the law cannot fall silent in the times of war. So even in unprecedented situations, you must follow the law. You must give appropriate opportunity to the concerned students. Ultimately, they may be guilty, they may not be guilty. What was the role attributed to everyone? I just remember a case. Again, it's not I'm not giving it's not exactly parallel. You'll recall that in 70s, there was a strike by the textile workers. And the whole textile industry workers went on strike. And it was those who did not return to the work, they were all dismissed. The charge against them was that they participated in strike. So the court held, no, this participation in the strike by itself is not an act of misconduct. I mean, our participation in those meetings, remaining absent, it has to be something more than that. Your actual participation. For example, I mean, some students might have simply attended the meeting. They may not have participated. They have not shouted the slogans. So how you, paint everyone with the same brush? It's not permissible. So therefore, these are the issues which ought to be looked into. There are a few issues which I was told that another thing is charges were never spelled out. It's not sufficient to tell them that you are guilty under particular clause or residuary clause which says that any other act which in the opinion of the authority is a act of indiscipline. That's not sufficient. So the role attributed to a particular student should be normally should be given. There should be more flexibility in that inquiries conducted by the university, but that does not mean that the very basic principle should be given a go by. I feel that this university is going under a great stress. It is on the forefront. Every day, there is some report on the JNU. But I think the students and the professors and all of you should remain united. And then tell the world that this university is the idea where the ideas are discussed, where there is academic freedom. Gulzar spoke on your university, and he used a very beautiful word. He said Vidroha. Vidroha is not Rajadroha. It's not sedition. Vidroha is your fight against injustice. It's not a fight against the nation. So I feel that that right of the university, that academic freedom, we should not be taken away. We should not get bogged down by these controversies. See, we should really, and this is how the nation will go forward with the open discussions. And these are the, and you see, I come from a very, a small town. I studied in Mumbai only when I did my law, and many times when I visit these universities. I visited Oxford and some other universities and some other great universities in India like JNU, and every time I feel though I miss this chance of sitting on that and listening to free and fair discussion on the. I really miss that. That's in those times were different. Our circumstances were different, but I congratulate all of you that you are a part of a. I'm proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Shah, for both your comments as well as your observations on the inquiry process. I think it would be correct to say that it means a lot to all of us who are present here. I now request Dr. Mrinal Satish to give his observations.
Good evening and thank you. I think as Justice Shah already mentioned, I think the focus of the entire process has to be the Constitution. And one thing that the Constitution tells us with respect to any process is the question of fairness and the following of the rule of law. The challenge that India and various other democratic countries have always faced is that when you have a crisis, you forget the Constitution and you forget the rule of law. And like Justice Shah already pointed out, I think this is a situation where the university, the responsibility on the university is to ensure that that rule of law, with respect to its own statutes as well as the constitutional guarantees that each student or each individual has, should be respected and ensured while the process is being carried on. So I have only 3 points to make in addition to what Justice Shah already mentioned. One is with respect to the constitution of the committee, right? Constitution of the committee itself. Like one of you mentioned, and looking at the statute, you have a fact-finding committee, which then inquiry is by the proctoral committee and punishment is by the VC. So therefore, there is a set framework that is already provided. Coming from an academic institution myself, or from the criminal law specialization myself, we know that you set up an inquiry committee, and if you set up something new after an incident takes place, it always creates doubts as to why something new was set up when there was something, when a committee was already existing, and unless you give proper justifications as to why you have done that, that's a problem in itself. And as I read the university statute, I did not see anything that permitted setting up of something called the high-level inquiry committee. It could have been a fact-finding committee that reported to the proctoral committee, but not replacing the proctoral committee. That's one. Second is with respect to these multiple documents that were sent to the students. They're very intriguing in terms of rule of law and natural justice principles, because the first one, dated February 16th, basically could have come to anyone saying that an incident has occurred and you come before a committee and tell us what happened, and then it says put down your defense, and if you don't, then you'll be punished. So what if I don't know what happened, and what if I was not there, and what if I don't turn up? I think that's a clear to me indication that if something like that were to be sent to anyone, it should be more clear with respect to what is it that information is being sought, why that information is being sought, and what is the punishment that would follow if that information is not given. And then that's also followed by this show cause notice more recently, which basically is again just one clause without saying, as one of you already mentioned, the report of the committee is not complete, so you don't really know what is the evidence, why, from what evidence did you come to that conclusion that these clauses have been violated, how did the committee come to the conclusion, and the most important thing, again, there were two facets of the incident, or what you said that the acting registrar had said, and all these inconsistencies, and the best way to figure out what is closer to the true position is through cross-examination, where each side gets to cross-examine the other on the sequence of events, and something close to what happened actually would emerge from that. Not, I didn't say the truth, not the truth, but something close to what really happened at that point of time. So, not having cross-examination at all in the process is, I think, the most worrying part of this process, that what actually happened and how that relates to the university's disciplinary code not being clarified is a clear violation, in my opinion, of principles of natural justice. So therefore, I think the university is best suited if it follows all the principles of natural justice, follows the due process, and then comes to a conclusion of punishment, or otherwise, like you said, for the last, nearly 50 years, university has been conducting its inquiry proceedings for various things that have happened, and those processes should continue to be followed, and not creating something new and circumventing all procedures because you think that something different has to be done in a particular situation.
Thank you very much. And finally, we'd request Varisha Farasat to express her views.
Thank you so much. I think a lot has already been said on the issue of natural justice, and from no less than Justice Shah, and also by Mrinal. I reiterate all of those. I would just like to make a few additional points on the issue of natural justice. I think the principle of natural justice is premised on the fact that it's not only that one should secure justice, but it should also be used to prevent miscarriage of justice. And I think this is clearly what is happening. That is, and there are line of judgments, not only in India, but in the UK, that kind of talk about the principle of natural justice and how it has to kick in whenever there is an apprehension or fear of miscarriage of justice. On the specific facts that were presented today, I think a few things, of course, have been said that which are very important about the ability of people against whom accusations have been made or show cause notices have been issued to be able to contend those or defend themselves. In that respect, I think one of the important things that one would reiterate is, of course, the principle that they were not even given enough time to contend the notice. And that, I think, is very important because I mean, Anirban, if I can name him, I mean, one of the persons who was named here, who's been issued a show cause notice, which is there in our dossier, was actually he was incarcerated. So how was he then supposed to I mean, I think it's anyone's guess that how this process could not have been legitimate in that sense. So there was a refusal to grant time, and again there are a plethora of judgments that support that fact that you should be given enough time, and this is in support to what Mrinal just said, that you should be able to apply your mind. No charge is made out against you. It is not stated in the show cause notice. You don't know what you're being called for, and suddenly you're not even being given enough time. On 16th, they are told on 16th evening that okay, you can give till 18th evening. I think that is definitely in contravention of some of the principles that are clearly stated in case law. Again, the basis of the entire complaint and all the evidence, I mean, again, that point has been made in different ways, but just to say that they would need a hard copy or a soft copy of all the various things that were sent against them. Otherwise, how am I going to make, I mean, I mean, of course, it's criminal law and it is principles of natural justice, but it is also common sense that unless I know that these are the documents that are against me and these are the contents of the documents that are against me, how am I going to defend myself? Also, one important thing is the entire concept of personal hearing within the concept of natural justice. And it is actually, again, it has been read into the law in various judgments that personal hearing is an essential element of reasonable opportunity. So what is reasonable opportunity to defend yourself? And personal hearing, in fact, has been held that personal hearing may constitute an essential element of reasonable opportunity, depending on the facts and circumstances of a particular case, of course. And one other important thing that I would like to say is that whenever we are looking at the entire concept of natural justice, it is not something that is there in thin air. There is a lot of jurisprudence actually in Indian law that talks about principles of natural justice, and it has the entire concept talks about the fact that whenever there are specific procedures, and if you actually, I was looking at the committee report itself, and the TOR says that they have been guided, that's the language, that they have been guided by Statute 32(5) of the statutes of the university in conducting the procedure. If that is the case, then they are clearly, the finding itself is in clear violation of the norms and procedures of which has already been laid down. So one, of course, aspect is that the TOR of this high-level inquiry committee was never made known and so on. But even if we were to take whatever is written in the high-level inquiry committee, because it is very detailed, and I'm not going to read this because all of you are, of course, very familiar with it, but then they are clearly in violation of the guiding principles, because those have themselves incorporated all of the things that we are talking about in terms of the right to be heard. And I think one of the final points, and I think to that extent, I would just like to make a few points that, in several judgments and, in labor disputes, in disciplinary inquiries, in a lot of administrative law rulings, a few things have been laid down, and I just want to put those 5 or 6 points here. That and this is in the context of, and would be equally applicable to a disciplinary proceeding, that again, the employee proceeded against is informed of the charges. The witnesses are examined ordinarily in presence of the person. So not only are you supposed to be examining and cross-examining, but whenever the examination also happens, it should ordinarily happen before the person who's been accused, because obviously it will be affecting him, and that is a very important point. The employee is, of course, given a fair chance to cross-examine and examine and cross-examine witnesses, and also this entire thing about a reasoned speaking order. The law is, frankly speaking, a little ambiguous about this in certain ways, but several judgments have also held that quasi-judicial inquiries or disciplinary proceedings like this, to a large extent, there would be a requirement that there is reason and it is a speaking order. And finally, I just want to make one last point, which is about this entire thing of bias. And I think I personally want to just state that the second principle, no, actually the third one I find quite sexist, but I'll still say it because these are the 3 principles that have been read into the law, which look at what would constitute bias. And the first thing is that no man shall be a judge in his own cause. Justice should not only be done manifestly and undoubtedly being seen to be done. And third, which I have huge problems with, but I'll say it is judges, like Caesar's wife, should be above suspicion. So basically saying that we cannot be looking at, we cannot be looking at who the people who are part of the inquiry committee are. But I think the essential element in something like this is that if we do not trust the people who are sitting there to be conducting this inquiry, because the inquiry has been, it has been actually I would not want to use the term vitiated, but if it has been adversely affected or there's an adverse impression that has been created against both the constitution of the inquiry and the members and the way it was going to be held, then definitely it would be, under the second clause, that justice should not only be done but manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done. And this is actually the core of what is being said, and I think I'll stop here, but I think these are just some of the observations.
Thank you very much. And thank the panelists for the specific observations they have put before all of us. They have added to the perspectives that we have developed about this whole process. Can I now invite the Secretary of the JNUTA, Dr. Vikramaditya Chaudhary, to deliver the vote of thanks.
So first of all, on behalf of JNUTA, I would like to thank Justice Shah for choosing to come to the campus and saying the most important thing that we have been saying for last 40-45 days, that we must have the right to dissent. That's the one of the most important thing that, so thank you Justice Shah for saying this. On the other thing that you have said about the inquiry process, the witnesses to be cross-examined by the accused and all these things, so it's we get a moral support and an internal support that on through what we have been saying, we were within the principles of natural justice and the upholding of the jurisprudence. So thank you for supporting us indirectly in saying that we had the right and we did the right thing. We, JNUTA thought to, have asked and thought to institute a judicial inquiry itself to investigate the process. Then we were suggested by the certain quarters that when the matter is sub judice, we should wait rather than going for a judicial inquiry by the JNUTA specifically, so we hold our nose back. My thanks definitely due to Mrinal for coming and sharing the details of the lacunas that we have seen, or the violations, if we say the violations in the procedures to find, if I may say so, the actual guilty or somebody who is putting, because we do not find anyone guilty. So thank you for clarifying those things. Definitely the thanks to Farasat for taking time out and coming and supporting and sharing the experience and reading the very important thing which we have been saying time and again to the Vice Chancellor, Rector again, that is not important that justice is done. It is more important that justice must be seen to be done. So thank you for reiterating the point. We teachers are not legal experts, but we feel emboldened within that what we have been saying, we were rightful and correct. So thank you once again all of three, Justice Shah, Mrinal and Farasat, for having come over here. That's more important because that gives us a legitimacy to say again and keep saying what we have been saying. So thank you again. Thanks to my colleagues, Professor Rajat Datta, taking tough job of presenting the 40 days things in less than 40 minutes, Avinash, friend, and definitely Arunima. So thank you all three for putting up things together. And a special thanks has to be for Professor Satyanand Sinha. We lovingly call him Sachi, because it's not easy to present something which you do not believe in, but it's still you presented. So that's thank you. And definitely then JNUTA thanks all the members present here, the teacher colleagues, the students for patiently listening and maintaining, most importantly, because there was all kind of things all out. So maintaining the decorum, and it's a very, very decent that we should have the right to raise any point of time when we feel that there is a time that we should speak up. So thank you for having been here. And I'm not thanking Surajit because he is part of JNUTA. So we all are taking pain time and again, and we will be doing it again and again. So thank you everyone. But